I will now turn it over to Lauren Levey. Lauren Levey has been on the board of the US chapter of Women's Declaration International basically since the beginning, but certainly since the chapter incorporated in 2021. And she's going to talk about the totally non-controversial, very easy issue of the United States presidential election. I'm being sarcastic there, but I will turn it over to Lauren now.
I have to tell you, in the aftermath of the US presidential election, it really comforts me to be right here on FQT with my sisters. I'm speaking today not on behalf of WDI USA, but just as myself, a radical feminist, a lesbian, a US citizen on the political left, and so forth. The Harris campaign had counted on votes from women, young people, and people of color. They miscalculated, right? Harris did worse overall than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Clinton had won the popular vote but lost in the Electoral College. But Harris failed to win even the popular vote. It seems undeniable that one reason for Harris's defeat was sexism, but there were certainly other factors too. According to exit poll numbers published by the Associated Press, fewer young women supported Harris in 2024 than supported Biden in 2020. In fact, fewer women of all ages voted for Harris than had voted for Biden. This was true despite the current crisis in the US around abortion rights following the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. Trump successfully built a working class base. Historically, the US left was home to working people. But in 2024, 55% of non-college educated voters voted for Trump. An important factor may have been the inflation during Biden's term that many people's incomes painfully failed to keep up with. Okay, and then I'm pretty sure that the Democratic Party's devotion to putting men into women's sports and women's public bathrooms, secretly indoctrinating school kids with gender identity, and medically mutilating kids' healthy bodies to disguise their sex without parental consent had a lot to do with this existing divide between college-educated voters versus non-college educated voters. And legacy media still isn't ready to admit the importance of gender identity in the election outcome. The Trump campaign was clever enough to call out trans stuff openly in their final push before Election Day. I think it truly didn't help Harris's popularity with working class voters when videos showing privileged students at elite universities demonstrating about queers and about free Palestine found their way onto the evening news and into social media. The videos showed college kids terrorizing maintenance staff, destroying property, and demanding free food that those rich kids labeled humanitarian aid. Their ever so intellectual professors supported them with incomprehensible words and strained logic. It just really didn't play well in the arena of socioeconomic class. It also didn't play well with women who overall voted more Republican than they had in 2020 for Biden. In 2020, 90% of Black voters voted for Biden, but it was down to below 80% this time. There was also a loss in votes by Latinos. I wasn't able to find any data on the lesbian vote. Can you believe it? But anecdotally, among my lesbian friends and acquaintances in my blue state of New York, there was overall loyalty to the Democratic Party. After all, most of us are old enough to remember when the Democratic Party championed women's rights and lesbian and gay rights, and Democrats felt like our tribe to whom we were loyal in some soul-based way. So when I or someone else would mention that thanks to Democrats, lesbians are now effectively unable to meet and organize publicly as lesbians in New York State because of laws protecting gender identity, that statement was typically met with disbelief or minimization. Based on my anecdotal experience, most of those lesbians probably voted not only for Harris, but also for New York's ballot Proposition 1, which passed easily, with the result that now gender identity will be protected in the New York State Constitution. The fact that it's in the state constitution means it's going to be more difficult to undo than just an ordinary piece of legislation. Although demographic analysis seems useful, its usefulness depends on the relevance of the demographic categories that are drawn. I'm not sure that all traditional tribes were relevant this time. Trump made significant gains in every demographic group that were accounted for in the exit poll, except that he didn't make significant gains among white college-educated women and women over 65. Anyone surprised by this election outcome might do well to take a fresh look at how people define their tribes. In fact, I'm doing that myself. For the record, I did not vote for Trump. As a woman, a US citizen, and a citizen of the world, I'm worried about his next presidency. I worry about his autocratic tendencies. I worry about his reliability with respect to international treaties. I worry about access to decent health care for all Americans and about basic financial safety nets for Americans who are retired or disabled or unemployed or underpaid. I worry about his overt misogyny, which encourages overt acts of woman-hating by all men. And I very personally worry that old Jewish, unfeminine lesbians, unprotected by a man, will certainly be among the most obvious first casualties. I worry about women's access to abortion and even to birth control. But today I'm going to focus on women and gender identity. So what can the victorious Republicans do now, and what are they likely to do to unravel gender identity from law and policy? I'm going to look at this with regard to each branch of the federal government, executive, legislative, and judicial, and with regard to state government, very briefly, right? As far as the executive branch is concerned, okay, President Trump could immediately issue executive orders that revoke at least some of the Biden executive orders that enshrined gender identity into law and policy, including Biden's first one, which defined gender identity discrimination as part of sex discrimination. The question is, will Trump actually do that? A year ago, he promised to revoke Biden's trans-related executive orders on day one. But can we believe what Trump says? Is gender identity an issue that is near and dear to Trump's heart? Even assuming that Trump has a heart, I don't think that women's rights are near and dear to it. He may be mildly interested in not spending taxpayer money on gender-affirming care for incarcerated non-citizens, as he stated during his campaign. But even that monetary interest could be weakened by money from the trans industry. You can be sure that the trans industry is lobbying the Republicans as we speak. On the other hand, Trump may be strongly motivated for personal and symbolic reasons to undo Biden's executive orders on gender identity immediately upon taking office. We'll see. As to the legislative branch, a Republican Congress, a completely Republican-dominated Congress, which it looks as though we will now have. The vote count is still out, but it looks likely. That Republican Congress could enact federal legislation that would advance women's rights. For instance, Congress could define woman as adult human female throughout all federal legislation. But will the Republican Congress do that? It may come down to financial considerations, including pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, which profits greatly from gender medicine. But it will also depend on US TERFs. Now that the public has been made aware of what it may be framing as the excesses of trans rights, we may see more and more media coverage of those excesses, although not necessarily coverage of radical feminists making radical feminist arguments. But fortunately, trans-related horrors are kind of self-peaking once they become visible. If we are able to continue our reality-based campaign in a focused manner, we TERFs, some good legislation might happen because, as Karadansky says, if we can be heard, we will win. As to the judicial branch, We already have a Republican-dominated Supreme Court, and there are already cases concerning gender identity in their pipeline, although the justices have the independence that comes with life tenure. They may feel even more comfortable ruling in favor of reality in the wake of the election results. I'm guardedly hopeful about the Supreme Court. Keep your eye on United States v. Skrmetti for the earliest indication of their thinking on gender identity. Oral arguments, December 4th. In the US now, we also have a system of state governments. State legislatures in blue states are still free to enact legislation that favors gender identity ideology, at least for now, but only so long as it is not in conflict with rulings by the United States Supreme Court. So what does all this mean going forward for US women who oppose gender identity ideology in law and policy? Can American radical feminists, who after all are products of the political left, continue to work with women who oppose transgenderism but are not radical feminists or not even on the left in any way at all? We mostly have worked reasonably well across the aisle from time to time, up until now, on a per-issue basis. But will so-called gender-critical women and radical feminists now inevitably be split over issues of Trumpian totalitarianism? Will men on both the left and the right capitalize on the divisions among women to divide us so much that we are unable to collaborate effectively in completing the defeat of gender identity in law? Democratic Party officials, having suffered a damaging and humiliating loss, are now the minority party. As the minority party, will they now be open to reevaluating their allegiance to all things trans? Women who advocate for women's sex-based rights may have a unique opportunity right now to influence the Democratic Party. We might ask elected Democrats whether they ever again want to win an election, or whether supporting the rights of men to enact their sexual fetishes publicly is more important to them. It is my hope that US women will stay focused on our collective fight for women's sex-based rights and against gender identity, and seize any new opportunities that may appear. Thank you.
Another wild card I just want to throw out there that I wasn't even thinking about until yesterday is that we are going to have a new Department of Justice starting in January. And that matters with respect to the Skrmetti case, because currently it's the United States Department of Justice against the state of Tennessee. And the incoming Department of Justice could very well change tacks, and that would be a massive game changer. Or they may just let it go forward. We just don't know. We'll see what happens.
Was the video that he made and the publicity did in the last couple of weeks before the election just to get votes? I suspect it mostly was, because as women have been pointing out in the chat, he loves rapists and prostitution users and men who are violent to women. I mean, that's his crowd. That's who he is. This is not a man who cares about women. I guess he could pretend to care about children in this sense. But I can't see, you may be right that he will just do this one thing that you're suggesting, Tara, but I can't think that he's going to give up just having conversations with Putin and all the things he really likes to do, to be concerned about what's happening to him. I can't see that. I do suspect it was to get elected.
And as Lauren says, we cannot forget that gender identity was not just a Looney Tunes theory made up by the left, though it is that, but it's also an industry. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And as Lauren says, or, you know, as I sometimes say, having fully colonized the left, it is going to colonize the right, or at least it's going to try to.